Welcome back to the show, and today we are going to be talking all about the recently released Cyberpunk 2077 next-gen upgrades and answering the all-important question, are these improvements going to be enough to drag gamers back to Night City after CDPR's troubled 2020 launch? Now, the story of Cyberpunk 2077's release has now passed into the annals of history as one of the most shockingly half-baked and well-covered video game launches of all time. And it's been discussed in such unrelenting depth and morbid regularity that there is likely not a gamer on Earth who isn't intimately aware of the details. It was disastrously buggy, poorly optimized, and essentially unplayable on the older Xbox One and PS4 systems. Things got so bad post-release that at one point refunds were being handed out left and right, and the game was pulled entirely from the PlayStation Store until CD Projekt Red could tape themselves back together and patch out some of the more egregious issues with the game. However, the undeniably poor reception didn't stop millions of human people from purchasing the game, many of whom, after experiencing the meter and user furor, decided to forego the proffered refunds in favor of sticking it on the shelf with a view to play it once CDPR released the next-gen version in what is now all of its current-gen glory. After all, it was Projekt Red, the makers of the Witcher franchise, so the chances were that the game would eventually come good. Regardless, there were of course also plenty of gamers who were playing on the more stable Xbox Series X and PS5 versions of the game who jumped in soon after launch and had a great time tooling around Night City in spite of the many bugs and lack of overall polish. And in my case, I'm a huge sci-fi fan, and that made the cyberpunk stylings of the world essentially impossible to resist. Plus, I'd been looking forward to the game for so long and had so much faith in CDPR that I wasn't going to let something as trivial and petty as reality get in the way of my audiovisual prize. However, all the while that I was playing 2077, I was painfully aware that this was not the game at its best. So at around the 40-hour mark, I forced myself to halt my cybernetic rampage through Night City in order to experience what remained of the story when the next-gen version dropped. So I waited and waited and waited, and finally earlier this week, CDPR saw fit to release patch 1.5, which contained the Series X, PS5, and Series S upgraded versions of the game. So let's get into exactly what was contained in this update. First up, we have a range of new technical and quality of life upgrades, including the introduction of new weapons and apartments for V, and the ability to modify the look of both the protagonist and their apartment at will. The game's economy, driving mechanics, loot system, and skill tree have also been rebalanced and improved, with some of the less useful perks being taken out of the game altogether and replaced by better alternatives. And those updates that I've just mentioned will apply to both the newer consoles and the older PS4 and Xbox One platforms. But moving on to the technical side of things, the PS5 and Xbox Series X are said to benefit from a range of general visual improvements, improved crowd reactions, and the ability to choose between two modes of play. The first of which is a performance mode that runs at a dynamic frame rate dependent scaling 4K resolution and targets 60 frames per second, though the devs warn there are still going to be some frame rate drops. Alternatively, you can opt to play in ray tracing mode, which enables ray traced shadows and higher quality screen space reflections, but will force you to play at 30 frames per second. The Xbox Series S, meanwhile, doesn't have the ray tracing mode and will run the game at 1440p, targeting 30 frames per second as standard. And as an added bonus to PS5 players, you're going to be getting some extra DualSense functionality. Now, moving on to what you actually have to do to get the new and upgraded version of the game, well, it varies from system to system. On Xbox, you simply need to update your existing version of Cyberpunk 2077, which will prompt it to download patch 1.5, which brings with it all of the newest features with no interruptions to existing save files. On the PS5, however, you're going to have to head over to the PlayStation Store or to your library and manually download the newer version of the game, which should have a distinctive PS5 symbol so that you'll know it's the right one. On top of that, you're also going to need to transfer your save file by uploading the PS4 save file to the cloud, and once you've installed the correct PS5 version of the game, downloading it again from said cloud. But just a quick warning that any trophies obtained using the base PS4 version of the game will not transfer over with your save file, so if you're looking to go for that plat, you're going to have to start again from scratch. And needless to say, regardless of your preferred platform, players who purchased the game physically and subsequently upgraded to the new version are going to need to keep that Xbox One or PS4 disc in your console while you're playing. Now on to the big question, is this the right time to return to Night City or to jump in for the first time? Well, there's no question that the new patch represents a decent upgrade and that it's the best version of the game that's been released to date. There's more content, way fewer bugs, and multiple modes that turn on limited ray tracing if that's a deal breaker for you on your PS5 or Series X console. Though I am going to say that after playing the game for about 5 hours last night, that the graphical upgrade between the quality and ray tracing modes wasn't anywhere near enough to make me want to play the game at 30 frames per second. With the bells and whistles turned on, sure, shadows are more realistic and subtle the way they would be in the real, but after being spoiled by 60 frames per second games as standard on the more powerful systems, I just couldn't cope with halving the frame rate. The game pretty much became a blur every time I moved V's head, which in turn made my head hurt and made my gameplay experience worse and solidified my love of playing at 60 frames per second. But regardless, if you're watching this video, you likely fall into one of two categories. Either you already have the game and you've been waiting for the next gen patch to drop, or you don't have it and you're considering picking it up. Well, if you own the game, then the answer is an obvious yes, of course you should jump back in. After all, you've already made the financial commitment, and as we've discussed, the 1.5 patch is a definite upgrade both in terms of content, appearance, and user experience. Especially if you haven't played the game since launch. It's night and day, so if you get a gap in your gaming schedule, you should definitely consider jumping back in and enjoying the dystopian technology-fueled world. And if you haven't bought the game, well, there's never been a better time to jump in. This is essentially Cyberpunk 2077 as it should have been at launch. The vast majority of the bugs are gone, many of the kinks have been worked out, it looks better than ever, and more importantly, there are currently some pretty outstanding deals out there if you're looking for a new game on the cheap. That said, if you don't feel the sudden and implacable urge to play the game right this second, then I might consider waiting. CDPR intentionally dropped this update in a packed launch window populated by Horizon Forbidden West and Elden Ring, both of which will likely still be more polished than Cyberpunk 2077 and provide a stellar gaming experience. Plus, it's not like 2077 is going anywhere, it's only going to get better the further it gets from launch. So if you're looking for a new game, I'd consider picking up one of these upcoming titles first and then getting a PS4 or Xbox One version of Cyberpunk 2077 later on when it'll potentially be even cheaper, and the upgrade will still be free to the most recent version of the game. But if you are feeling that itch to jump in, then why not first avail yourself of the 5-hour free trial which is accessible via your favoured console storefront. And just as a quick aside, this just so happens to be the last day to enter my giveaway to win a copy of Horizon Forbidden West. So if you're interested in getting that, be sure to like, subscribe and comment on the video, and check the terms and conditions in the video description below. And that's it for today's show. Let me know what you think of the episode and whether you're thinking about jumping into Cyberpunk 2077 now that the next gen patch has dropped. As always, be sure to keep it here for the biggest news, reviews and reactions from around the video gaming industry.